The US has bases across the world from which it projects power, air power and sea power. It has the Anderson Air Force Base on Guam in the Pacific Ocean and Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. Now, in a recent decision, the UK has decided to transfer sovereignty of the Chagos archipelago back to Mauritius. Diego Garcia is part of the island atoll which belongs to the Mauritius. But the UK had retained this archipelago when it gave Mauritius its independence in 1965. That's nearly 60 years ago. And since then, the UK and the US have jointly operated Diego Garcia as a military base. In fact, it's one of the world's most important such military bases. It's an unsinkable aircraft carrier, a strategic bomber base with a 3-kilometer long runway from where the United States has launched airstrikes against Iraq and Afghanistan using B-1s, B-2s and B-52s. Now, joining me to discuss the importance of this UK decision to transfer the sovereignty of this island back to Mauritius, and of course, India's role in this decolonization project and what it means for India and the region, are Ambassador Y.K. Sinha, former High Commissioner to the UK, Strategic Defence Analyst Commodore C. Uday Bhaskar, and my colleague Deepak Badana continues to remain with me in the studio. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus show. Commodore Uday Bhaskar, colonization is something we thought ended in the 19th century. But here we have this Chagos archipelago, which the Chagosians were literally thrown out like intruders, thousands of them, literally in the 1970s. Tell us the significance of this decision, this handover of sovereignty from the US and UK back to Mauritius.
This return of sovereignty to Mauritius by the United Kingdom is very important symbolically because it marks the end of the colonial phase, this being the last outpost for Great Britain and the British Empire. As you rightly pointed out, there was a kind of perception that the colonial phase in history had ended in the middle of the last century after World War II.
Right.
But few people had noticed that Chagos had been taken, quote unquote, illegally, and may I add, unethically, by Great Britain after the end of World War II.
Right.
And when they took over these 55 islands in the Chagos archipelago, they expelled the local residents who had lived there for centuries. Chagos was inhabited from East Africa around the time, I would say, 500 years prior to their being evicted.
Right.
And it's linked up with the slave trade in Africa. So they are the original inhabitants.
Right.
And illegally, unethically, Britain lied. When the matter was taken up internationally, they said there were no native inhabitants in these islands.
Right.
And that is how they were able to carve it off when Mauritius got its own independence in 1968. So symbolically, the return by UK to Mauritius is the end of the colonial era,
right,
in a tangible way. It's also, to my mind, Sandeep, if I may add this, a reflection of the excesses
right,
of colonization. As you pointed out in your opening remarks, they were thrown out. They were the original inhabitants. And their lives, the Chagosians, from then, the early 70s to now, even now, de facto, nothing has changed. Great Britain and US will continue to have control of the Chagos archipelago. Diego Garcia, of course, is the crown jewel for them.
Yes.
So I don't think much will change for the Chagosians in a substantive way.
Right.
But there is symbolism about the return of sovereignty.
Right.
I think that is the important part and the end of colonization.
Right.
Sandeep?
Important symbolism. And the sun, it seems, is truly set on the British Empire, at least in the Indian Ocean region. There must be little outposts across the rest of the world, but it has finally ended. Great Britain is no longer ruling the waves in the Indian Ocean. But, Ambassador Yash Sinha joins us now. Ambassador Sinha, welcome to the News9 Plus show.
Thank you.
Apart from being High Commissioner to the UK, you were also our representative to the UN Committee on Decolonization in New York. Break down for us the significance of this handover of sovereignty from the UK back to the people of Mauritius.
I think it's a very significant achievement for Mauritius because they have been fighting a long legal battle in different international fora. And as you're aware, the UN General Assembly, if I recall correctly, in 2017, had sought an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice.
Right.
And in 2019, the ICJ ruled in favor of Mauritius.
Yes.
Even the UNCLOS, the law, the Convention of the Seas, had ruled in favor of Mauritius. So there have been a body of legal opinion and in the multilateral fora ruling in favor of Mauritius because it was a decolonization issue that was left by the British in 1965. They hived off the Chagos archipelago and made it British Indian overseas, British Indian Ocean territory.
Right.
So I think it's a significant step as far as sovereignty over that archipelago is concerned.
Yes.
And in that sense, a victory for Mauritius. But I think it's a victory for diplomacy and negotiations also. Because the UK, I recall I was in London as the Indian High Commissioner when the then Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson had approached us for help in trying to get a negotiated settlement through. So I'm very happy that finally that has come to pass and now there will be a formal agreement or a treaty that will set out the terms.
Right, absolutely. Ambassador Sinha, it's also a victory for Indian diplomacy because from what I recall, this is a stance that we have consistently taken from the 1980s. We did not recognize the BIOT, and I think at various international fora we've opposed extra-regional powers continuing to hold on to island territories like the Chagos and of course Diego Garcia. But given the fact that nothing really changes on the ground, as Commodore Uday Bhaskar was saying, that the US is not going to vacate Diego Garcia in a hurry. It's an unsinkable aircraft carrier for them. They launched their strategic bombers from there. How does things really change on the ground? The fact that Mauritius gets sovereignty, but it can't do much about the US military presence on those islands.
Well, you see, the U.S. military presence is on one island, Diego Garcia, which is the biggest out of the 60-odd islands in the archipelago. But what is important is that even the Chagosian people who were forcibly removed from there have the right to return now, and it's very much up to Mauritius how they handle it. And more than that, Mauritius will also get some fee for leasing out the island to in Diego Garcia to the UK and to the US as far as the military base is concerned. So they've and I think as far as I recall, the joint statement issued in the name of the two prime ministers, UK and Mauritius, talks about investments and assistance to be given to Mauritius. So in that sense, it is significant. And not to forget, the last paragraph of that joint statement actually acknowledges the role played by the US and India in facilitating this agreement.
Yes, absolutely. But Commodore Uday Bhaskar, given China's growing maritime prowess and its surging maritime capabilities, do you see bases like Diego Garcia becoming more important for the United States, India, Australia, and other members of the Quad? And in that sense, it becomes a base that all of us can use together to ward off the Chinese.
Yes, I think in the Indian Ocean, the islands nations, the small island states, are going to become strategically more relevant for the major powers. Here we are talking about the United States, which is already resident in terms of its military capability in Diego Garcia. China, as we are aware, is looking for openings in the Indian Oceans. Maldives is one example.
Yes.
They have a fairly deep partnership with Mauritius already. And there is this old adage, Sandeep, that in the Indian Ocean, geography is going to shape strategy.
Right.
If you have an island, you can proceed in a certain direction in terms of your assets, not just ships, aircraft carriers, and submarines, but also assets in space, cyber, underwater cables. So any island in the Indian Ocean today, particularly given the kind of location that the Chagos archipelago has, it brings a lot of opportunities in a strategic and security sense. And if I may add to one point that Yash had just made, Ambassador Sinha had just made, one tangible for Mauritius is that with the return of sovereignty,
Yes.
if the UNCLOS is interpreted in a fair and equitable way, the EEZ for Mauritius is going to
Yes.
increase in a significant manner.
Right.
And if these major powers, whether it's the United States, China, or India, are able to enable Mauritius to, in a way, harness its blue economy potential,
Yes.
that would be a plus point not only for the citizens of Mauritius, but for
Yes.
the Chagosians. Because we don't have we haven't got the sum, it's not been disclosed. But I gather Britain is going to give a large amount of money in a phased manner to Mauritius for the Chagosians and those who wish to return. I don't know how that will work out because at the moment the reality is the Chagosians were not consulted.
Right.
I gather not by Mauritius, not by UK. It's a diaspora now.
Yes.
It's scattered. So I think that is a slight disappointment. But one hopes that whether it's a China or a US or an India
Right.
would be able to engage with Mauritius in a manner that does not repeat the rhythms of the imperial powers and the colonial powers and they only exploit
Right.
the local residents or the inhabitants. I think that will be a litmus test for how the major powers are going to conduct themselves in relation to the smaller island states.
Right,
Sandeep?
absolutely. Thank you very much, Commodore Uday Bhaskar, for putting that into perspective. The fact that Mauritius could be looking at some increase in its revenues, and of course that's an island nation that's of great strategic interest to India. Deepak, apart from the fact that almost 70% of Mauritius is of people of Indian origin, and we've traditionally had very, very good relations, excellent relations with Mauritius. But thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us on the News9 Plus show, giving us the true import of this decision, this historic landmark decision, decolonizing the Indian Ocean region. Thank you very much.